Hi, my name is Leandro Facchinetti, and in this video I want to show you a bunch of free scripts that I wrote for REAPER that speed up your workflow when editing, especially videos and long forms of audio like podcasts and non-musical editing in REAPER. So I developed a bunch of free scripts in several different categories. Really, they do very different things, but they all help you out with editing these forms of things. So I am bundling up all of them in this video. So let's check them out. I'm first going to demo all of them for you, and then I will show you how to install everything if you are interested. But I will also do a code review, but if you're interested in that, then that will be a separate video. I will go over the Lua for all the rescripts and talk about how I developed everything. If you're interested in learning how to write rescripts yourself, then definitely check that other video out as well. Anyway, let's jump into REAPER. And the first of these rescripts that I want to show you is called Prepare for Editing. So there are two different flavors, and what this is going to do is just take the default project that REAPER opens and adapt it or prepare it for editing audio or video. And this means a bunch of things, really. It's going to do a bunch of things, but the idea behind this is that by default, REAPER opens this project when you just start it that is better suited for music. When you're creating music, you care about bars and BPM and time measures. So that's what you care about when you're doing music. But if you're doing videos or long form of audio, like a podcast or a roundtable or an interview, a radio show or whatever, you probably don't want these settings. And that's what this task is going to do for you. It is going to prepare the project and set everything up. So let's go to this one first, the audio editing. And this is going to pop up this screen. And this is something that I cannot change using Rescript to the best of my knowledge. And it's also something that depends on your project. So I just pop this up, and the next thing that's going to happen when I click OK is the project settings is going to show up. And I have to set the project settings, project sample rate. So I'll click OK, and under project settings, project sample rate. It's usually something that you want to set yourself instead of just allowing the default to do whatever it wants. And when you're working with audio, then you may want to work with 44.1 kilohertz, or you may want to work with 48 kilohertz. And then when rendering, you may want to downsample to 44.1 kilohertz. That's the standard for distribution of podcasts, for instance. It's 44.1. But the standard for recording in many cases is 48. And when you're working with video, then definitely you want to work with 48 kilohertz. Anyway, so when you do that, you click OK, and then your project is all set up to work with audio. Many things have changed, and to be honest, I don't remember all of them, so I'm going to edit the action. I'm not going to go over the code. This is just so I remember everything that's going on. So the first thing that is happening is the time here, the unit of time is no longer bars, and it is now hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. So hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. Same thing here with this other ruler. It is in the right unit of measurement. And then the next thing is this one. So here, when you change the play rate, so you can change the play rate if you want to edit faster and you don't want to hear the audio in real time. You want to hear it in 1.5 times or 2 times. You just want to hear it faster so you can work through a lot of material faster. But if you just change the rate here, by default, REAPER will change the pitch of the audio as well. So you speed things up, and then you start to hear all these funny voices that are very high pitched. Definitely not what you want. So in this task, I enable this option that will preserve the pitch when you're changing the play rate. And of course, there is another video in this channel in which I go over another one of my actions called fast forward. So if you are using these tasks that you can install using the same method I'm going to show later, then it's very easy for you to just toggle. As you can see here, I'm toggling between my fast play rate of choice, which is 150%, and then back. So it's easy for me to fast forward when I want or play in real time when I need. When I just made a cut that I'm not sure about, I can toggle this off so I can come back to real time, listen to that, and then toggle it again and listen in 1.5 times. So that's what the setup task is doing for you. It's making sure that you are never gonna hear one of those funny duck voices. And then I'm disabling the grid lines because you don't need grid lines if you're not working with music. It's still going to align. So you can see here that the snap is still enabled. So it's still going to align items. So if you have, for instance, here, 2 items like that, and you move them around, it still snaps. So that's usually what you want. You may want to snap things if you want to maybe you recorded all the audios using the same recorder, so you know that the audios are in sync. You just want to grab the items and make sure that they are aligned. Snapping is still enabled, but the grid lines to show you bars, so that thing you don't need anymore. So I turned that off. And that's all that this task is doing. Now let's look at the other one for video. So let's see what happens when you're preparing the project for video editing. When I run that, it's similar to the other one. It's going to open up project settings, but this time we need to set up 3 things. So besides setting the sample rate for the audio, which we did already, we also need to set the frame rate and the video size, the resolution. I'm gonna click OK. So under project settings, that is already set for this project because I just did that. But for video, then I can change the frame rate for the one that I usually use. I'm in Europe, so it makes sense for me to record in 25 frames per second. And my preferred video size is 2K, which is this resolution. If you want to change this to 4K or maybe 180p, whatever. And then you may want to change other things in your project, of course, but these are the minimum things you have to change if you're doing video in REAPER. And that's everything I change when I'm doing video in REAPER. Anyway, you click OK, and now there is another setting here. So the video is doing everything that the audio setup is doing, and then some other things that are specific for video. So the time ruler, the unit on the rulers, and the disabling of the grid, all the same. But then there are these extra things that you have to do. So this one has to do with the alignment of the items, and the grid is still disabled, but you want the items to align to a grid that you cannot really see, but it is just the frames. You have 25 frames per second here in this project, so you need to align the items on one of these positions where a frame starts. And this is telling you how to do that. So the next thing that happens after you click OK is that it's going to show up the grid snap settings, which is something you can find here if you right-click on these, I guess these 2, either the grid lines or the snap settings. If you right-click, it opens the grid snap settings. That's what's going to happen next. And I have to set the grid snap spacing to frame and the minimum to 0 pixels. So this is what happens now. This is the screen that opens when you right-click on these 2 buttons. And this is already disabled. So the grid snap settings follow grid visibility is something that is enabled by default when you open REAPER. But my script already disabled this. But the script unfortunately cannot change. As far as I can tell, it cannot change these settings, so you have to come in here and change them by hand. What this is doing, now that this is done, I can close this. What this is doing is let's zoom all the way in, and then you can see that the project is still, the grid lines are disabled, you cannot see them, but I can only move in units of 1 frame at a time. So you can see, for instance, here, the period between 0 seconds and 1 second in my project contains 25 frames. You can check that by looking at the yellow box on the right of my cursor. There are 24 frames, and the next frame is 1 second. And then my unit of measurement here, the only way I can move items is 1 frame at a time. You can see that it's moving in chunks, and these chunks are of 1 frame. Of course, I can always hold one of my modifier keys, and I think by default it's Shift, but you can hold that and move things around, which may make sense if you have just an audio track in your video. You may want to change this free form, but of course, for all the video items, you want them to snap like so. And this whole task of preparing the project for audio and video is very much based on the REAPER blog tutorial about setting a project up for REAPER. I automated most of that. I give you one of those prompts to change by hand the things that I cannot automate. And there is one difference, and that is in the Reaper blog setup, you have to show the grid and set the grid to frame, which makes the grid look like that. And I guess that's good if you want to have really good visual feedback of what you are doing here. You can see all the frame lines, but as you zoom out, then I don't like to see all these lines everywhere, and they are not even showing me frames anymore. I mean, I have to zoom in, and then the resolution is good enough for me to see one of the frames, and I can see the grid lines matching to frames. But if you do it like this, then it's not even matching to frames, and then you have to come here and say that the minimum is 0 pixels, and then you end up with something that looks like this. It's all grayed out, it's weird. So I think it's much better to disable the grid lines, come here to the grid snap settings, follow grid visibility, disable that. And now I can snap without following the grid visibility, which is now disabled at all. You don't even see the grid, but I can still use the grid to align my video items like that. The next task that I want to show you has to do with the play behavior in Reaper by default. And this is something that came from one of the Reaper Mania videos. I transformed that custom action that he shows in one of the videos into a rescript. It is still the same, it does the same thing, but it's easier to distribute and to talk about it if it's a rescript. I think it's easier to distribute a rescript than to distribute a custom action. Anyway, so what happens in this one has to do with the default behavior, which I guess is good for some people, but for me, it makes absolutely no sense. So you hit play and you hit stop, and then you are back to where you started. You see, I am back, the edit cursor is back where it started. This makes absolutely no sense to me if you hit play and stop here on this YouTube video or in any other player. That's not the behavior. I have no idea why this would be useful and why this would be the default and why no one else created a rescript to fix this. I have no idea. But in any case, I created one of these. It is called play or stop. Move it, edit cursor to play cursor. It's doing the same thing as the custom action in the Reaper Mania video, but using this, I bound this to space. So now my space bar is doing the thing that I think everyone should be doing all the time, or at least most of the time, which is when I hit the space bar for the first time, it plays, and then I hit again and it stops, and the edit cursor is where it stopped. So now I can just hit play and stop. And I can keep doing that, and it will behave the same way that any other player would behave. And to be fair, you could instead bind the spacebar to play pause, because pause does the right thing more or less. So if I hit play and then pause, and then unpause and pause, then it's sort of doing the right thing. But there are many things that don't occur if you're pausing as opposed to stopping. In particular, with how the effects flush their buffers and you hear some audio coming after you and you don't want that, or even some effects that have to do some setup anytime you stop and play again. Anyway, it's much better to just do the default thing, which is to literally stop, but just fix that edit cursor to move it to where you stopped. And to come along with that, there is another one of these small little utility rescripts that is play from start of select time or edit cursor. So this one I bound to a different key, shift space. And in the rare occurrence that I need to, for instance, hear the start of these two items again and again, because I am fine-tuning some edit, I am moving these things around, and I always want to play from here. Well, by default, if I was using the default play pause or play stop in Reaper, I could play and stop and then do some change and play and stop and do some other change and play and stop. And now that I bound this new rescript to my spacebar, I can no longer do that, right? So that's why I created this other one. It plays from the start of the selection. So all I have to do is just create a time selection. I can create it. It can be very small. It doesn't really matter. The point here is just that the cursor is going to move to the start of the time selection every time I hit shift space. So now I can hear everything. The edit cursor is now later in the project, but if I hit shift space, it plays from that point again. This is very rarely useful, but now I have a way to simulate the default behavior in Reaper. And of course, if I need, I can always enable the repeat, and then I can do some time selection, and it's going to repeat the time selection. So now I'm not touching anything, and it's going over again and again. And if I need, I can stop at any point, but if I hit shift space, in my case, it's going to start from that point again, which is more or less what you want always when you have this sort of thing. So maybe you're perfecting one edit, that's how you do it. Another useful thing about this custom action here, this rescript, is that if you have, I'm going to put the items here later just so I have some more space when I'm playing, but suppose that you are playing something and then you realize that your edit cursor is somewhere else, and you realize that you want to play from the edit cursor. So I'm going to move it, to demonstrate this, I'm going to move this item here. So you're playing and you're doing some edits, your edit cursor is over here, and you need to play from the edit cursor. The same task will do that. So I just hit shift space, and it moves back to my edit cursor when there is no time selection, because if there is a time selection, it will replay from the time selection. But if there is only an edit cursor here, it will replay from the edit cursor. So you see no time selection, it plays from the edit cursor, which is rarely what you want to do, but it's there. So the same action works for both of these scenarios. The next rescript is also super simple. It's like a custom action turned into a rescript. And what it does is ripple delete. And usually if you have this enabled like so, then your edits are already rippling. So if I select this one and delete it, then the one on the right moves along. And all the things would move along as well. So even if I had something like right here, I could have a marker and it says I'll move. As you can see, when I delete this item, the marker moves along with it. Project regions, everything moves along with it. It is fine in that aspect. But what if you want to delete this portion of time for whatever reason, right? You may have this item here and this other item here, and then you have some silence in between and you want to delete that. Well, there is really no way for you to delete that chunk of time using the default things that come with Reaper. So I made this action called ripple delete, and it is also very simple. It's just a custom action, really. It's just one or two, I guess two. It's just two actions called in a row. So what this one does is when you hit it, it will delete that chunk of time. So that works even if you have no item to delete. You just have a chunk of time that you want to remove. And it still does everything you would like. So this is still preserving the markers in the project. And all the items move along. And if you have, of course, the time selection over some item, it's going to split the item and remove that chunk for you. And if your item is audio, then it will do the thing that you set Reaper to do when you have this enabled, for instance. Then Reaper will create some fade outs and fade ins to avoid clicks. So if your item is MIDI, then it will not create any kind of fade out or fade in. But if your item is audio, so I guess I'll just grab an item that is audio and put it here. Oh, and I have ripple enabled here, but you don't even need that. Even if you have ripple disabled, you can still select a chunk of time and use my custom action. I bound it to the letter D, so I just hit D, everything moves along. So you don't even need that enabled if you don't want it enabled, which may be useful in some cases because you're just dropping in some new items. You're going into the item explorer, the media explorer, and maybe you have some B-roll or you have some sting of audio and you don't want everything to ripple all the time. So enabling this may not be what you want. But even if that is the case, you can always come here, select some chunk of time and run my ripple delete action that will ripple that. It will move everything along. And in the case of an audio item, it may fade. As long as you have this setting enabled, it will create fade outs and fade ins. Just for audio items, not for MIDI, not for dedicated video processor items, not for all of those kinds of items that you would not want to create fades. And then suppose that you have no time selection. If you have no time selection, but you do have an item, or even multiple items really, but if you have an item selected, then it will delete that item. And if you have multiple of these items, then I can always create one of these. Like if you select a period, but you don't have a time selection, you just have a period that is just a bunch of items that were selected, you can have some gaps in between, it will delete everything that was selected. So it will even delete this one in the middle because it will create a time selection from the beginning to the end. So if you have a bunch of items to delete, you can just select the first, select the last, and delete, and everything will repo. It will delete, that whole period will be gone. The next one, the next rescript that I want to show you has to do with the tracks and creating folders with tracks. So it is called group tracks into a folder and ungroup tracks from within folders. If you already know, there is a task called create folder to contain selected tracks, and my task is very similar to that. The only difference is that this one always asks you for the name of the parent. And in many cases, I don't want to give it a name. So instead of using this rescript, you can use mine, because mine does exactly the same thing. So you have a bunch of tracks, you select a few of them. I will zoom out so you can see the folders being created. So you select a few of them, group tracks into a folder. It does the thing that, I don't know, Ableton Live does, or many other editors do. It just creates a folder with the selected tracks, and you can always double click here and give this track a name. I think it's more ergonomic to work this way. And there is the reverse task as well. So you select the folder, or even if you have multiple folders, I can always come here and create a bunch of them. If you have multiple folders, then you can select all of them. You can even select tracks that are not folders. It will just ignore those, but you can hit ungroup tracks from within folders and it will delete the tracks that are folders. So you can see all these tracks like this one is a folder. I am going away because I'm a folder. And of course, if you have elements, if you have items like this, you have an item in the track that is a parent, that is a folder, that track is going to be deleted, so that item will go away. And that's usually what you want, maybe? It depends. If you don't want this, then you may want to move this to some other track like this one. This one is not a folder, so you can always come here and ungroup everything and the item will remain there. But usually I work this way, in which I have a folder track that has no items in the track itself. It's nice that REAPER allows you to have items on the folder tracks, but usually I don't have them. So it makes sense for me to just delete the track that is a folder. And that's why these two tasks are different from some other tasks you find, some other actions you find in SWS and in Repack. For example, there is this SWS task called make folder from selected tracks. So to demo this, I have to create a bunch of tracks, and I can select some of them, and make folder from selected tracks is going to make the first track that you select into a folder. It's not going to create a new track, and that becomes your folder. So when running my action, which I have bound to some keyboard shortcut, when I run it, it creates a new track, and that is my parent. But if you're using this, then you have to already have created the parent. So maybe this one will be the parent, and you select all of them and you run this. It's almost the same, but not quite. It is a different behavior. And the same is true of this other task that comes with SWS to indent selected tracks. So if you have some tracks and you want to indent or make them children of the parent, then you can use indent. And of course, you can undo that with unindent, but still not the same as the task that the rescript that I'm sharing with you. And similarly, there is this one called Dismantle selected folder. So if you have a folder already and you dismantle it, then it becomes a regular thing, that is a regular track that is not a folder, but it doesn't delete the track that is a folder. So if you work in a way that you have some items in the track and you want to preserve them, so you can always use the one I showed you before. You can select everything and you can make folder from selected tracks, and you can dismantle a selected folder, and that undoes the result of the previous one. So if you work this way, that you already have tracks and you just want to make them into folders, then my task, that my REScript is not for you. But if you work in a way that you have some tracks and you want to group them, then my REScript is for you. And then finally, the last 4 REScripts that I want to share with you are just things that I created when I was creating the first REScript, the one that sets up the project. I noticed that there were no tasks to set the grid lines on and off, and to set the preserve pitch audio. We talked about this before. Preserve pitch in audio items when changing the master play rate. So I noticed that there were tasks, there were REScripts or actions in general that would toggle the grid lines and that would toggle this setting, but not that would turn them on or off. So in my big script to set up the project, I already do the turning off of the grid lines and the turning on of this setting. But if you have some other thing that you want to do, or a custom action or something like that, and you want to have this as part of your custom action, and you want your custom action to always turn the grid lines off, you don't want to toggle, you always want to turn them off, then you can use this auxiliary REScript and it will do the thing for you. So if I use this one, it will always turn the grid lines on. You can check here that it always turns it on. I can run it as many times as I need. And if I want to turn the grid lines off, you can look at this part here, and when I run it, I can run it as many times as I want. It is always turning the grid lines off. And the same for the preserve pitch audio. You can turn it on and off. It's just a small auxiliary script that helps you build custom actions more easily. Okay, awesome. So suppose that you liked one or some of these REScripts. How do you install them? Well, you go to the video description below. It will link to my repository where I have all my effects and scripts. You grab this and you have to have installed repack and SWS, and there is a link here to a REAPER blog video showing you how to do that. But once you did everything, you can come to the extensions repack, port repositories, and paste that URL. And I don't need to do that because I already have it, but when you hit OK, and make sure that when installing repack, you enable the setting to install all packages when you import a new repository. So when you do that, you will get all of these scripts and some JS effects, many other things as well. You can just install everything, bind the things that you like to some keyboard shortcuts or menu items over here, and you're good to go. And that's all I have for you today. If you're interested in learning how these scripts work, there is another video in this channel in which I do a code review. I go through the code, the Lua code for all these REScripts, which is interesting if you want to get into writing your own REScripts. But if you just want to use this, you don't have to really learn anything besides what is on this video. So thanks for checking this out, and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in some of these REAPER things and if you're interested in programming, because I also talk about some other topics beyond REAPER. And that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching. Bye.